Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to M-Train's LinkedIn Live, and happy to be with you today. And we're going to be discussing easing everyone's anxiety, or at least some thoughts and strategies on how to do that, and adjusting our workforce to the new norms that have been imposed on us unwillingly by the current environment. With me today is Steve Cadigan, former VP of Talent at LinkedIn and the head and president of Cadigan Talent Ventures, an expert at all things human capital and strategies for optimizing talent strategies. So, Steve, thank you for joining us today.
Great to be here, Janine.
So I guess what I wanted us to kind of dive into was, let's just, think about from big picture, Steve, and then drilling down into kind of some more kind of granular tactics. To me, as I think about this is just putting human resource leaders, talent leaders in the spotlight. Like this is the moment for them to take charge. And maybe if you can just start off and tell us kind of how you think about this and what, heads of HR and people should be thinking about.
Sure, Janine. And, I had the crazy experience earlier in my career of sitting in Singapore when SARS broke out back in 2003. And I was you're about 3 hours away from ground zero for Guangzhou, outside of Hong Kong, where it started. And I think back on that experience and reflect on the fact that there really are two big elements in play here. There's COVID-19, coronavirus, but there's also panic. And what panic is caused by is we no longer control awareness of what's next. We're in a sort of fight or flight dimension right now, which is really hard. And it's in every sphere you can think of. It's in your home, it's in your family, it's in your community, it's in the business. And I think we've never been at this extent. We've never faced this before. And even if you did manage through SARS, I don't think this pales SARS in comparison to what we're dealing with right now. I think it's pretty significant, and we don't know what's next. And so how do you face that? So when I think about someone who's looking over an organization and where we are and what needs attention, I think the first place that I want to start is what's the psychology, what's the mindset of my team? And the first place I'd want to be starting with is, are my senior leaders okay? Because they're setting the tone. They're the ones who are really, everyone's going to fall behind or sort of index off of their mood, their tone. And so if I am in a position of influence over trying to calm the organization, that's how I look at my role in a cultural capacity, whether it's human resources or anyone else in caring about and nurturing culture right now, are the people who are making the biggest decisions and influencing the mindset and the culture of the organization, are they okay? And where are they at? And so I would want to be checking in with them every day, several times. Where are you at? How are you doing? What's going on? What are you hearing? What are you seeing? And so really increasing my cadence, especially because we're in this isolated reality right now, which is, again, a completely foreign frame of interaction that most organizations have never really operated in this dimension. We have people working from home, or separate offices or branches. But now everyone, even in separate branches, is now really operating in this new dimension. So I think about, how do I get a pulse? How do I try to make sure that my leaders are okay and that they're aware of this new reality, and that we need to be leading and communicating very, very differently right now. So that's sort of the first place that I'd want to start in thinking about this, and I think what a pandemic and what a crisis does is, first, it's going to expose, do you have a emergency communication plan in place?
Yeah.
And what are your channels, and what are your linkages, and who are the most important people, and do you have a rhythm to that? Who's responsible for making sure that we have a tight communication plan every location of the company, so that we can be making those decisions.
So I want to kind of move on from that, but just as you said, an emergency communication plan, and then also a disaster preparedness, which in this situation would look like, okay, if somebody gets sick, one of the company leaders, who steps up. I mean,
Right.
that's something that needs to be thought through as well.
Right.
But so, notwithstanding that, as you're talking about checking in with company leaders, let's start with the CEO. I mean, what does that look like?
Right. Well, I think what I would want to orchestrate is making sure that the CEO, especially, is getting in front of this, that we are proactive with communications. Now is a time where what's going to be called into question is every decision is going to be microscopically analyzed. And are you present? Are you active? And I would strongly encourage people to over-index on transparency now. I mean, I've been saying this for years and years.
Yeah.
What cultures I think need to be about today is about trust and building trust. And now human nature is lack of information. I assume the worst. We have so many things we don't have information about. We need to over communicate to build trust. And so I would really want to make sure that my CEO, doing okay, your family okay, your parents okay, your kids, everything. Is your husband okay? Whatever, and make sure that is good. Okay, now we need to make sure that we've got a plan. And the goal is not to be right about everything. The goal is to make sure that we are making people aware of the things we know, the things that we don't know. So, and I think given the explosion of news right now around layoffs, furloughs, cutbacks, shutdowns, I mean, everyone's going to first focus on family and then focus on, oh my gosh, this is my paycheck. What's going to happen to me? And I think we're going to need to get in front of that. Don't wait and see how things are going to play out. I think the holding on to information longer because we don't really know, I think that's a faulty strategy that is going to impede your ability to build trust, for example. So that's kind of what I start and make sure that we're trying to do is more active communication. And Janine, I really think if you have the technology backbone to support this, and most video conferencing companies are giving their stuff away for free. I mean, I know that Cisco's doing it with WebEx. I know Zoom has opened up the number of licenses you can have without having to pay a fee and so forth. But I strongly recommend to try to avoid the email. I mean, email's good because you can edit and re-edit and you can get it right. But now's the time for authenticity, and people want to see you and know that you're sitting in your home, that you're, dealing with what you're dealing with in the same way that everyone else is dealing with it. And so that I would suggest the trust building happen in a way and communications in a way that's live to the extent that you can.
Yeah, I mean, so there's that human connection, right? I mean, when you're in a crisis situation, people need that human connection. It's reassuring, it's calming. I want to go back a little bit and tease out some of the guidance that you're offering. So, what kind of occurs to me is the exec team, and I just think this is just human nature. They're going to be focused on like nuts and bolts, which is cash management, reforecasting business. How much is this going to impact the business? I mean, obviously it's going to impact the business, but they're focused on the biggest things in front of them. Mm-hmm. And so to me, that seems like that is the opportunity, if you will, for that head of HR to step up and say, let me just draft your communications for you. Let me just take care of this because I know you can't focus on this right now. So there's that. And then, as you were saying, Steve, the transparency, I think, is key. Somebody that I know who's a healthcare worker was just last weekend, kind of grumbling because her executive team in the healthcare facility was, less than candid. And you feel it, like, it's like, come on, don't try to give me that information when it's just not, it's blatantly not true, right?
Yeah.
I just think that the potential for damage is greater. I think this is what you said, when you're not leveling with people, in a crisis situation. People need to know what's really going on, and if you don't know, then just say to be determined. We'll update you week by week.
That's right. And I think that what you're getting to is, culture leaders, talent leaders, HR leaders really need to help more than ever be the conscience. Of course, your CEO and CFO and operations and so forth are like, oh my gosh, are we going to have to start throwing jewelry overboard to keep this boat afloat? And they're facing some big ones. But I think, most good leaders are going to appreciate that everyone wants to really get a sense of, where we are and what we're doing. And so I think your guidance is really well placed in that, to the extent that you can be that person who's just taking charge and saying, hey, these are the talking points that I think your organization needs to hear. These are some of the questions and concerns, and here's some suggested responses to those. Here's a timeline recommendation to ease that burden, because you're absolutely right. Like, CEOs in particular have new weights on their shoulders in impossible, dimensions that they're not even prepared for. So to the extent that you can step up and be that person, and maybe even supplement some of the speaking. I mean, in the situations that I have faced at times where I have a CEO who's a brilliant leader, not the softest, warmest person in front of the whole company, but very trusted and respected. There's maybe you have them joined by someone who is that calming influence, right, who does have also has the faith of the organization, and so you have a rhythm and a compatriot in the delivery of that. If that person isn't really, stepping up as much as you'd want, you have to keep a pulse, on all these things. But this is really a great time for culture leaders to, I think you need to pulse more. Whatever tools and resources you have is to collect feedback. The other thing that I'll say, Janine, is that I think particularly in a crisis that we're facing right now, is your ability to control the culture. I think you need to, if that's what you're looking at around this notion of culture, I think you need to step back and say, we have to try to build trust and stabilize and lower fear as much as possible. And all the research that's come out in the last 5 to 10 years, even dare I say, validated by Google, suggests that psychological safety is the number one driver of performance. And so that should override all this stuff, so that if you can surface those points that are going to help deliver that as much as you can. Hey, we don't know if we're going to have to shut down, but employees are smart and they're getting access to information really quickly. And if they know that a supplier is cut and that's going to lead to lack of access to be able to complete a certain product, which is going to lead to some really hard decisions, they know that. So that you can get out there and say, hey, we're recognizing there's an issue. These are the steps that we're taking to try to mitigate it. Or, we'll know in a week whether they're going to be able to step up and find alternative supply chains. I mean, that's really, really important. And these things are coming up quickly, like daily, in some cases hourly. And so your recognition of the pulse and ability to react needs to step up. And that cadence really needs to step up.
And so on that cadence, because I've also been thinking, this has to be a consistent kind of communication cadence. Is this weekly, do you think? I mean, what is your thought?
I think for the leadership team, it needs to be daily. You need to have sort of a, nerve center, if you will. And then you have to determine, based on your dynamics in your own organization, what rhythm fits. I think right now, at a minimum, a few times a week, depending on your kind of business, maybe it's daily. But if it's once a week, that may not work right now, because you're seeing, we're all seeing on the news, the world is going sideways every single day.
Yeah.
And new information is coming out, and new health guidance, and new restrictions, and so forth. And so I'd want to get in front of that if I could, And again, there's so many ways of doing this. If you're doing live, town halls, breakout groups, smaller sessions when people are going to feel more comfortable, maybe raising something they're uncomfortable with. I mean, Janine, you should speak to this, because this is everything that M-Train does, is providing a platform for people to talk about really hard things. There's never been a better time for us to try to help people, find ways of expressing concerns that they have,
Yeah, so certainly, I thank you, for that guidance, Steve. I love the idea of just several times a week. So with your direct reports, daily for sure, and then for broader groups, I think several times a week makes a whole lot of sense. And then to the extent that there's any application or functionality to allow people to, I always love the ability to be anonymous, because we just know that that's human nature. People don't like to necessarily step up and publicly ask a question. So that if you can free up that communication channel and allow people just to more comfortably ask the hard questions that they may not want to ask publicly, that would be great, I think.
Yeah. And I think what you're getting at, Janine, is we're building a new culture right now. If you're like, hey, our company meeting is once a quarter, yeah, throw it out the window. I mean, you need to build a new culture that addresses this. Now, I'm not saying like from the ground up, but I'm saying a new rhythm, a new way of connecting and listening and understanding and responding. Because people, and here's the other interesting thing that I'm seeing play out in all the organizations that I'm talking to right now. And I feel like I'm getting a master's degree in biology while we're also trying to figure out a PhD in culture and change management, is that I'm finding employees don't want to just know what's going on with the company. What are we doing to help? What are we doing to use our resources in the community? And so that's another amplification of, oh, great, CEO. So what are you doing about, all these 2 million N95 masks that we have in our fabrication plant? Are we going to keep the fab open? Or are we going to give those masks over to the local hospital? So there's some pretty interesting dynamics, but I think the more you can recognize that this is they're new norms and new methods, and also appreciate that I think people are looking not just in our company and our families, but our supply chain, our whole ecosystem. And I think, if you can, and have to shift a little bit around, and you have to look at your economics, can we contribute in a not-for-profit, but way that stabilizes to fight this battle that we're fighting, And I think that is going to give you an opportunity, I think, to really show what you're made of. And when we were going through the massive reductions back after the dot-com bubble at Cisco in 2001, 2002, we had to let 8,000 people go, which was trauma. Off of a baseline of around 40,000, we'd exploded really fast, and we shrank really quickly too. But one of the things John said really stuck with me is that in times of challenge and adversity, now is when you find out what your leadership team is really made of. And so it is a moment of truth in a way for leaders. And unfortunately, leaders, we don't have a script for you, and which means we got to fall back on, well, how would you want this communicated to you, or how would you want to understand what's happening if you were the recipient, and trying to, have some empathy and some compassion and appreciating that everyone's looking at the world a little bit differently. But there are so many impossible decisions that business leaders have to make now that I think, you got to find some good counsel, and you got to be that person if you're the talent and culture, owner, to really help be a sounding board for some impossible choices, some Sophie's choices that are happening everywhere. And it's really hard. Yeah.
So what occurs to me as you're talking, Steve, is, in our culture report that we published in March, the single most important indicator of cultural health is just strong, healthy norms and practices. And so as you're talking, what I was thinking about is, even as we're kind of recasting our norms and practices to respond to this environment, doing so intentionally, with some thought, like, okay, this is how we're going to, show up and interact with each other. That is a good thing, a healthy thing, because without that deliberate intentionality, then you kind of just have a vacuum, and you're vulnerable to, the whims, basically, however people want to show up and act. And that's what we know that takes organizations down a bad path. So, we're all reshaping our norms and practices, but doing so kind of in a really intentional way is correlated to good, strong health.
I agree. And I think what I would even go a step further and say hyper intentionality around communication. I'm not sure how many of our listeners have ever worked from home over an extended period after having been in a headquarters. I worked in the field for a couple of years. And one of the things that I saw happen, which shocked me, Well, I went into a field role in Asia after having been mainly in a headquarter role most of my career. And I'm like, why are those field people always so cranky about those people in headquarters don't know what's going on? And I was probably in the field for about a week, and I got some communication from headquarters, and I'm thinking, what are those people in headquarters think's going on out here? Like, they don't know what they're doing. And slowly, also over a period of about 6 to 9 months, I realized those great relationships I had in headquarters were just not getting nurtured. And it was on me. Like, I wasn't reaching out and finding ways to build bridges that replace the hallway conversations or the lunch conversations, or let's go out to dinner, let's go get a coffee. You don't have those. So, and this is one of the things that, and there's a lot of great information coming out from people a lot smarter than me, all over the web around working from home and great behaviors. But I think this intentionality that you mentioned, I would even suggest hyper intentionality around connecting and communicating and finding ways to depressurize. I love seeing these Zooms where people are having happy hour together, or crazy T-shirt day. I saw the viral one on Twitter where someone forgot to turn off their camera on Zoom and took them, had to go to the bathroom, and unfortunately the whole Zoom call got visibility.
Oh, no.
But I mean, humor is the ultimate depressurizer here.
Yeah.
And it's sometimes it's challenging to use humor when it doesn't feel like we're like in an over serious environment right now, where I've got to be serious. Lives are on the line. And yes, that's true. But we have to find a lightness, and for my family and I, like we look for the goofiest video of the day, and we, whether it's a Trevor Noah video or some oopsie in a video conference. But this notion of finding those moments and hyper connecting, not just for something serious, for something, maybe for something lighter to help take the edge off.
And I just want to kind of impress on something that you said, Steve, which is video on. I mean, to the extent that you can, we need to see the face. We need to see the human connection. And so I think people are just so used to just digital and just, instant messaging through Slack or other types of applications. And I just don't think that's enough to support the human connection. And that's, times of crisis, you need to connect with people.
Right. And I think, I was on a call having some legal work done for one of my entities, and the lawyer prefaced the phone call by saying, "Hey, I've got a 1-year-old. I'm at home.
Yeah.
She's awake, and I might need to be interrupted." And I found that interesting that wasn't the normal interaction I was expecting with a lawyer. And I felt a stronger connection, that I understood her world. And maybe that's some of the silver lining that we're dealing with here, is that, we all have personal circumstances, whatever they are. I have a brother who's disabled that lives nearby, and I have to take care of him. And now we have to find a different rhythm of doing that. And, we're finding out things about people that we spend time with that maybe we didn't know. And now we're in a world where we don't have to apologize for that. Like, it's part of our daily rhythm that, we've got dogs and cats. And I don't know if you watch the music videos like I do, but Mary Chapin Carpenter singing from home, and she's got these dogs that jump on her when she's playing her tribute concerts. And it's just absolutely hysterical. But I think there's, these are some things that I try to look for, expressions of humanity, and we're all in this kind of together. And that's, I think, making people feel safer and making them feel not alone is really, I would invite the design of those for cultural ambassadors. Absolutely.
So no doubt this whole event is going to accelerate evolution into more and more kind of easiness to work from home, and then just less inhibitions or concerns. I mean, I think back to even probably 10 years ago, when it was, certainly for some, industries, lawyers, and probably others, where it was just like no one would think of like acknowledging that they were working from home. They'd pretend that they're actually in an office, but they're not. Right. So this is probably going to move that all forward. Just a few more things I want us to touch on before we wrap up here. So it seems to me that there's, an opportunity to leverage diversity and inclusion in this moment, and then also an opportunity to kind of proactively, as a HR leader or culture leader, kind of suggest a routine or a schedule. So let's talk a little bit about the diversity component. And what I mean by that is when I first talked to folks at M-Train about this, I was really cognizant that we've got some folks that have never been through a trauma before. And this is really like their first trauma. And you've got other folks that, I mean, everything obviously is its own unique situation, but people who have experienced, kind of lived through the world during 9/11, lived through the world during the .com bomb, have a longer view. And I thought that it was somehow, it would, be helpful to just kind of foster that, like connect with people who navigated this already.
Absolutely, Janine. And then we can expand that diversity out to people who've been in the military, people who've done service, who've done tours of duty, who've real faced life and death situations. I mean, we had someone at LinkedIn who was a heart surgeon and lives are on the line. I think it's a great opportunity for us to be mindful that a diversity of groups can really offer connection and information to help us all solve this, And I'm looking at it now, it's like, we're all trying to shelter at home to flatten the curve of the virus. And I was thinking this morning around, what we're going to talk about today. So, well, maybe what cultural leaders should be thinking about is flattening the fear curve, with this. And I think your point around, employing the incredible experience, the diversity of experiences for multi-generational workforces, which prior to this was a big issue for my business. I mean, it's the number one challenge most countries in any geography in the world. It's like, wow, the psychology of how people think about work is very different. I think we can use that to our advantage now in ways that maybe we didn't think about before. Like you said, people who've been through 9/11 or SARS or some military tour of duty or something. Now let's bring some of those experiences out and share those as lessons to help people to cope with this. And maybe some of the younger generation that seems sort of fearless of, org change, maybe now they're like, whoa, this is not what I can't just jump to another company, another job because it's not what it used to be. Right. Yeah.
And, just connecting with folks that have successfully navigated it and come out the other side to say, this too shall pass. And then some order. So I know that at M-Train, I think it's on our resources page, we put together a nice suggested, here's your COVID-19 schedule, and trying to be productive. And, when I first looked at it, I was kind of amused, but, it actually is helpful in that I think people are feeling unanchored and a little bit adrift. Yeah. And so as a culture leader or head of HR people, just to kind of proactively say, okay, so in this time period, some people are calling it an enforced study hall. Others are like, okay, this is the time to just lean in and focus on our professional development or get to those projects that have been on the back burner that we've never had a chance to get to. Whatever it is, both like at the level of like, here's over the next 60 days, and then at the individual day level, like, okay, each day, this is how you're going to, spend, or like a suggestion of how you're going to spend your day. I think it's helpful.
I totally agree with you. And I think that's a great suggestion for culture leaders, which is, in periods of fear and periods of being scared, I think the more leaders and the more we can provide people with frameworks and designs and rhythms that they don't have to contemplate or think about or worry about, and say, hey, we really find that productivity comes from arranging your day in this kind of sequence. And maybe the company, maybe you build in, hey, we're going to have a company all hands, these days of the week from this time. We recommend that you catch up on email this time. You have a video conference with your direct reports and your coworkers, at least 2 or 3 times. Keep your video open from have an open video cam office hour for this time and so forth. I think it's a really great idea to bring structure. And when we introduced today one company I was with where it's like, do whatever you want. And we thought people were like, oh yeah, this is great. We're like, people are like, what do we do? Like, okay, so we should prescribe. Here's a bunch of things you could do. And those of you that want to build your own, great. And once we started people, giving people that structure, it helped them figure out how to work on their own later, And so I think that's a really great idea. Bring some structure, consistency, and that, we're creatures of habit. And I think we feel calmer when we have more structure sometimes. Yeah.
Very much. So I think we're at the top of the hour. So let's wrap up here and summarize, Steve. So let me try to summarize what we're discussing. So for people leaders, culture leaders, couple things that are opportunities here to step up. So number one, be the master communicator for your exec team. Help them out. Help them be the communicators they need to be. Two, that communication has got to be that humanizing element. So more communication, be very intentional about it, be very human about it. That will help serve to kind of ease anxieties. And then with that comes, try to put out some kind of schedule or some order so that people stay on track. Am I missing anything there, Steve?
Yeah, I think, the notion of transparency, raising your cadence, looking at building new cultural norms for the foreseeable future, try to find the upside, try to find ways to lighten the seriousness and the severity of everything that you're facing. Yeah, but I think you hit it all.
Okay. So I think with that, I'll just say this is certainly difficult and a scary moment, but it's also an opportunity for culture leaders to step up and be the leaders, to help the organization out. And I think with that, wish everyone best of luck today. Have a good day. Stay safe, stay healthy. Steve, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Janine. Yeah. Wish everyone the best out there. I mean, just you and your families. Yeah.
All right. Thanks. And till next time.